All right, so today I'm just going to give you a wee update on where we're at with the dairy beef progeny test. So a bit of background to the project. Dairy beef is not a new thing. It's been going for decades. But the nature of dairy beef is changing. So historically, dairy beef was a Hereford bull over a straight Friesian cow. But the dairy herd now is about nearly half crossbred cows. So the Friesian Jersey cow is the most common dairy cow that's out there, and most of the Friesians exist in herds where they run alongside crossbred cows. So getting a straight Friesian as the dam of your dairy beef calf is becoming considerably harder. So we've now got to look at ways of how can we make dairy beef work in a world where the dairy cow is most likely a crossbred. Another change that's happened is that the number one breed over heifers and also a number one follow-up bull these days is a Jersey bull. The prospect of those calves as dairy beef calves is not great, but in the climate of high milk prices, the calf is relatively less important to the dairy farmer, and so they take the Jersey bull because it's guaranteed easy calving, and that's what we're competing with. We've got to find bulls that are going to let these cows calve easily. So I thought I'd put this slide up. This is from Beef and Lamb New Zealand, and it just tells us of the cattle that are slaughtered in New Zealand this year, where they've come from. So 40% of them have come straight off a dairy farm, cull dairy cows, dairy heifers that didn't get pregnant, and a few breeding bulls. That leaves 60% that have come off sheep and beef farms, and of those, almost half started out in the dairy industry. So they're dairy origin beef bulls or beef dairy cross steers and heifers. So cattle of dairy origin are nearly 70% of the cattle killed in New Zealand, and they're a big part of what we're doing here. So it's quite important that we make the most of this resource. So the aims of this project were to demonstrate a successful dairy beef system, to show that we do have the genetics to make it work. We want to identify the individual bulls that will do well in that situation, and we want to compare the performance of recorded bulls versus the dairy industry staple of average unrecorded beef bulls. We're looking at the dairy farm outcomes, so how does having a beef calf affect the performance of the cows on the farm in terms of rebreeding, in terms of milk production, and that's being done by a PhD student, Lucy Coleman. And then we're looking at the finishing performance of the resulting calves, because they've got to perform not just in the dairy herd, but in the finishing system as well. And so we've got PhD student Natalia Martin, who will take those cattle right through to a meat quality evaluation. The bulls that we've used in this project so far are just Hereford and Angus, and we've selected them for traits primarily birth weight, calving ease, gestation length. Those are the traits that are most important on the dairy farm. And then we've put some emphasis on the growth traits and the carcass traits. So we want bulls that are going to perform for the dairy farmer and right through to finishing. The results I'm going to present today, we've grouped the bulls into three categories. We've considered them bulls in the top 10% of breed for the particular trait that we're looking at. We've considered them bulls in the top 50% of breed, and then what we're terming controlled bulls, which are bulls with a breeding value that would be similar to your average unrecorded bull of the same breed and industry. So in 2016, we've got the first cohort of calves. There were 502 singleton calves born, and they had an average birth weight of 37 kilos, which is pretty comparable to that of your straight Friesian. It's a little bit heavier to that of your crossbred calf. The average gestation length was 281.9 days, so pretty comparable to what you'd get using dairy genetics. Because these calves are reared in a dairy system, they're weaned. We bring the calves in every week, and we wean anything that's 85 kilos and heavier. So the weaning weight is the same for all of the calves, irrespective of their growth potential, a minimum 85 kilos and an average of 90. But so what we can compare instead is how long did it take those calves to get to weaning weight. So the faster growing ones reach a weaning weight younger. So the average weaning age was about 79 days, which is equivalent to a growth rate of about 0.67 kilos a day prior to weaning. So how did they perform? What I've plotted here is birth weight EBV of the sire versus the average birth weight of the calves for that bull. And they're split, the red dots for Hereford, the black dots for Angus. Now, if you remember, a breeding value measures the sire's potential for change in birth weight. So an extra kilogram of birth weight in the sire, the calves are going to inherit on average half of that. So a perfect relationship here would be an extra 0.5 of kilogram of birth weight for the calf for an extra kilo of birth weight in the sire breeding value. And so what we've got here is pretty close to that for both breeds. So 0.45 for the Hereford and 0.77 for the Angus. So an extra kilogram of birth weight in the EBV was translating to heavier calves. If we look at our bulls broken up into the average unrecorded, so an average unrecorded Hereford was producing about a 39 kilogram calf. Bulls in the top 50% of Hereford shaved just over a kilo off that, down to 37.8 kilos, and getting into the top 10% of breed, 36.5, so another kilo taken off. And you can see for Angus, more or less the same result. As you increased their ranking within the breed, you decreased the birth weight. If we look at gestation length, again you'd expect a half a day shorter gestation for a shorter gestation length EBV of one day, and we saw basically the same thing, that gestation length increased by 0.8 for Hereford and 0.4 for Angus for every day longer the bull's gestation length EBV. So once again, selecting for shorter gestation length was getting shorter gestation calves. And the farm that we used these on was a little bit taken by surprise and very, very pleased by how short gestation some of those calves were. They'd sort of sketched out expected due dates for all their cows, and we came in considerably shorter in some of those early calves than they were budgeting on. So if we break these down again into the average unrecorded, the top 50 and the top 10%, the average unrecorded Hereford bull, 284.5 days. If we go for a top 50% recorded bull, we can shave 2 days off that, and then a further day by going to the top 10. And much the same is seen in the Angus, that we're getting shorter and shorter as the merit improves. If we look at weaning age, so we can't compare directly with an EBV for weaning weight here because we're comparing an age to a weight, but you'd expect a higher 200-day weight to equate to earlier weaning, and that's what we're seeing here. So for both breeds, the bulls with the better growth EBVs weaned their calves younger. And so if we look at the average unrecorded, 77.5 days, compared to top 50% of breed for Hereford, we'd shave a day off that. And the same for Angus. You can move from 80.8 days down to 78 days. There's no bulls in the top 10% of breed here for 200-day weaning weight because we selected heavily for low birth weight. So that meant because we had low birth weight EBVs, we didn't also have high 200-day EBVs. So very few of our bulls fell into the top 10% of breed for 200-day weight. But some of them perform very well for later weights. So we will have some good genetics there. So what we can see from what we've got so far is that, unsurprisingly, a high merit bull boosts the performance of the calves. If we look at the R2 heifers, so in addition to the mixed age cows, which were bred by AB to a whole variety of bulls, we also put some natural mate bulls over the first calvers. So we had a control group here, which was bulls mated to Jersey bulls, heifers mated to Jersey bulls. So the Jersey bulls we picked were breed average for live weight and gestation length. And then for beef bulls, we sought bulls that were in the top 15% of the breed for birth weight and direct calving ease. And the actual bulls that we ended up with for Angus were in the top 5% for both birth weight and direct calving ease. And for Hereford, we're in the top 10% for birth weight and the top 15% for direct calving ease. So when we look at how those heifers performed, the birth weight, as we expected, were tiddlers out of the Jerseys, 29 kilos. The Angus were about 4 kilos heavier, and the Herefords were a couple of kilos heavier than that. Unfortunately, that couple of kilos seemed to have been the tipping point. So whilst we got 4% assist from the Angus compared to nothing from the Jersey, that went up to 12% in the Herefords. The mean calving date was similar for the Jersey and the Hereford and a little bit shorter for the Angus. We can't measure gestation length because they were naturally mated, but they were all exposed to the bull on the same day. So an earlier mean calving is perhaps suggestive of a shorter gestation. And then we would compare weaning age. There's no weaning age for the Jerseys. All those calves went on the bobby truck at 4 days of age. So they were a comparison only of calving. But the Hereford calves were weaned 4 days earlier than the Angus calves, which is unsurprising given they were born a couple of kilos heavier. So where have we got to so far? Dairy beef is adding value on the dairy farm. The particular farm we're using are thrilled to bits with the calves we've produced and the calving that they've had. And they're more than happy to do it again for the second cohort. You can use EBVs to get the kind of calves you want. Pretty clearly, the type of bull you select is reflected in the type of calves that you're getting. So our next steps from here, we've got another cohort in 2017, so there'll be another 500 odd calves born from the mixed age cows and a couple of hundred calves from the heifers. And then we're going to take these calves through to steers to about a 300 kilogram carcass and the heifers to a 245 kilogram carcass. And they'll be measured through their life for growth and then post-slaughter for meat quality. And that's really where we're at so far.
Got lots of questions. Questions for Rebecca? And just wait for someone for Max to... What was the price paid for the bobby calf and the profitability of keeping the beef calf and selling it as a weaner?
So the bobby calves made on average just under $30. The beef calves were sold, it was an internal transaction on the farm from the dairy farm to the sheep farm for $500 on average. And they reckon it cost about $180 a head to rear them. So they're pretty open. Money-wise, hands down, the beef cross are winning that one. Some of the sort of crunch points we've come across is if you want to take bobby calves out of the system, it's a lot of calves on farm in the first little while that you've got to rear. So they're currently in the process of building a bigger calf shed. But they like what they're doing, and they're going to, once the project is finished, they're going to continue using beef bulls.
Numbers on the cost to a dairy farmer of using a recorded bull, the cost you'll have to pay to buy it versus the cost of an unrecorded animal, and how that affects your profitability in the end?
We haven't yet. It is part of the plan. It's complicated by what are they then going to do with those calves. So if they've got in the system that we've got where they're going on to an associated farm, where they will also get the benefit of the better growth from the recorded bull, it's probably a different sum than if you're selling a white-head calf or an Angus cross calf at 4 days of age, where at this point you generally are not being paid extra for that.
Have you done any calculations, it might be a bit too early, on the heifers that had to be assisted? Did it affect their milk yield or the rebreeding success?
Rebreeding, we've had a quick look. There was maybe one extra empty heifer, but the numbers are not high, although it was 12% and 4%, it was not many heifers, so it was only out of 70 odd heifers, so we've got a very small number of actual heifers to look at. But we did have a look, and maybe there's an extra empty heifer, but it's one. And no milk yield, they've just dried off, so that's next step.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. So